Welcome back to History for Sleep, a place where the past slows down, where distant worlds reconnect, and where history is allowed to unfold without urgency. As you settle in, let your breathing soften. There is nothing to solve tonight, only stories, moving quietly across continents and centuries. Tonight, we're exploring something most people never see, yet live inside every single day. The unseen global ancient trade routes that shaped modernity. Not the famous roads written in textbooks, not just silk or spice, but the hidden paths, the forgotten corridors, the networks that moved ideas, beliefs, technologies, and people long before borders existed. These routes didn't just move goods, they moved the future. Long before maps were accurate, long before nations were named, humans were already connected. Trade did not begin with money. It began with need. Salt for survival, stone for tools, shells for meaning, stories for understanding. Early trade routes formed naturally, following rivers, coastlines, animal paths, and stars. And once formed, they rarely disappeared. They evolved. One of the earliest known global trade materials was obsidian, volcanic glass. Sharp, rare, deadly when shaped. Archaeologists have found obsidian tools thousands of miles from their volcanic sources. This tells us something profound. People traveled far, or knew others who did. Trade was already social, already relational, already global, in spirit if not in scale. Across ancient Africa, trade routes connected sub-Saharan communities to the Mediterranean world. Gold from West Africa moved north. Salt from the Sahara moved south. These routes crossed some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. Why risk it? Because salt preserved life, and gold symbolized power. Entire empires rose around these exchanges. Yet many of these routes left no permanent roads. They existed in memory, in tradition, in trust. When those memories faded, the routes vanished. The Silk Road is often spoken of as a single path. It wasn't. It was a web. A constantly shifting network of land and sea routes stretching from China to the Mediterranean. Silk moved west. Glass moved east. Paper, gunpowder, mathematics, religion, and disease moved everywhere. Buddhism traveled these routes. So did Islam. So did Christianity. Ideas were traded just as freely as goods. Some historians believe modern globalization began here, not in factories or ships, but in caravan camps under open skies. But many of the most influential trade routes were maritime. Coastal networks across the Indian Ocean connected East Africa, the Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia thousands of years before European exploration. Using monsoon winds, ancient sailors timed voyages with astonishing precision. They didn't conquer coastlines. They cooperated with nature. Spices, textiles, ivory, metals, and knowledge flowed quietly across these waters. Long before modern shipping lanes, the ocean was already global. In the Americas, vast trade networks existed long before contact with Europe. Obsidian from Mexico reached the American Southwest. Copper from the Great Lakes traveled south. Feathers, cacao, and jade crossed entire continents. No horses, no wheels, just human endurance and shared purpose. Some researchers believe these routes shaped political alliances, social hierarchies, and even city planning. Trade was power, but it was also connection. And this is where theories begin. Some historians argue that ancient trade routes transmitted not just technology, but worldviews, concepts of time, of law, of the self. Others suggest shared architectural styles and mythological similarities emerged through these networks. And some conspiratorial theories go further, proposing that ancient civilizations were far more interconnected than mainstream history admits. That lost knowledge moved quietly across continents and was later forgotten. There is debate, there is evidence, and there are gaps we still cannot explain. As you listen now, notice how familiar this feels. Global connection is not new. It is ancient. What is new? is how loudly it happens. The ancient world traded slowly, deliberately, patiently, and in that slowness, foundations were laid. Long before compasses pointed north and long before sailors trusted paper maps, ancient traders learned to read the world itself. The wind had patterns. The sea had moods. The sky carried memory. Across the Indian Ocean, merchants did not sail randomly. They waited. They watched the monsoon winds, which reversed direction with near-perfect regularity. 4 months at a time, ships would remain anchored, crews living among foreign cultures, learning languages, marrying locally, exchanging ideas as naturally as goods. Trade was not fast. It was immersive. This is why ancient port cities became some of the most diverse places on Earth. Long before modern globalization, these coastal hubs were already multilingual, multicultural, and surprisingly tolerant. When trade depends on trust, coexistence becomes practical. Some historians believe these maritime routes shaped modern ideas of diplomacy more than warfare ever did. Not through treaties, but through repetition. Meet, trade, return. Again and again. Far to the north, another kind of trade quietly reshaped the world. Amber, warm to the touch, golden, almost alive when polished. Amber from the Baltic Sea has been found in graves as far south as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Long before iron coins or paper money, amber carried symbolic and economic value. Why? Because it felt rare. Because it glowed. Because when rubbed, it produced static electricity, a strange, almost magical effect to ancient observers. Amber routes connected northern Europe to classical civilizations. Along with the amber traveled myths, technologies, and styles. Some researchers argue that early European cultural unity began not with empires, but with jewelry. Across Asia, steppe routes carried more than caravans. They carried people. Nomadic traders moved between settled civilizations, acting as translators, guides, and cultural bridges. They knew which routes were safe, which leaders could be trusted, and which seasons meant danger. These traders rarely left written records, which means their influence is often invisible. Yet without them, many famous routes would never have functioned. This is one of history's quiet truths. Those who connect worlds are often forgotten, because they belong fully to none. In Africa, trade routes moved inland along rivers rather than roads. The Niger River became an artery of exchange. Canoes carried salt, fish, gold, and grain through dense landscapes where roads would have been impossible. Cities rose where rivers met land routes. Not because of conquest, but because of access. Trade shaped geography as much as geography shaped trade. In the Americas, ancient trade networks followed mountains, valleys, and coastlines. Shells from the Pacific appeared deep inland. Obsidian crossed deserts. Textiles carried patterns that spread across cultures. Some archaeologists believe trade routes influenced belief systems. Symbols repeated across distant societies. Ritual objects appeared with similar forms and meanings. Coincidence or connection? The debate continues. As trade intensified, something subtle happened. Specialization emerged. Certain regions became known for specific materials, others for craftsmanship, others for knowledge. This specialization laid the groundwork for modern economics. But in the ancient world, it also shaped identity. To trade was to represent where you came from. Goods carried reputation. Trust mattered more than profit. Some historians argue that ancient trade routes spread more than prosperity. They spread disease. The same networks that moved silk and spices also carried pathogens. Plagues followed caravans. Illness traveled by ship. Trade connected humanity, for better and worse. This dual nature is one of the reasons ancient societies both relied on and feared long-distance exchange. Connection brought opportunity and vulnerability. There are also theories, debated and controversial, suggesting ancient trade routes transmitted advanced knowledge now lost. Astronomy shared across continents. mathematics appearing independently but suspiciously similar, architectural techniques emerging in distant places at similar times. Mainstream historians argue for parallel development. Others wonder if knowledge moved quietly and was later forgotten. There is no final answer, only patterns. As you rest now, notice how much of modern life echoes this ancient world. Supply chains, cultural exchange, global dependence. We live inside systems built thousands of years ago, refined, accelerated, and amplified. The routes may be invisible now, but they are still there, beneath the surface. History often remembers empires by their rulers, their wars, their monuments. But trade routes were sustained not by kings, but by ordinary people whose names were never recorded. Porters who carried goods across mountains, sailors who trusted winds they could not see, guides who memorized landscapes instead of maps, negotiators who spoke softly enough to keep peace. These people shaped the world more quietly than armies ever could, and because they rarely ruled, they were rarely remembered. Women, in particular, played essential roles in ancient trade networks. In many societies, women controlled local markets. They managed household production. They negotiated prices. They maintained relationships between trading families. Along maritime routes, women often acted as cultural anchors, marrying visiting traders, translating customs, stabilizing exchanges. Trade created families that stretched across regions. Some historians argue that early globalization survived not because of contracts, but because of kinship. When trade is personal, it endures. In West Africa, women dominated salt and grain markets for centuries. In Southeast Asia, women controlled river commerce. In the Americas, women produced textiles that functioned as currency. Yet written histories rarely mention them. Trade moved quietly, and so did those who sustained it. Not all trade involved physical goods. Some of the most influential routes carried ideas. Writing systems spread along trade paths. Numerical concepts traveled with merchants. Calendars aligned across regions. Religion moved this way too. Buddhist monks followed caravan routes. Islam spread through merchants before armies. Christianity traveled with traders across the Mediterranean. Belief systems often spread faster through trust than force. When someone you traded with believed something, you listened. Languages changed as trade intensified. Words borrowed. Grammar softened. Meanings blended. Linguists can trace ancient trade routes through shared vocabulary. Spice names. Textile terms. Navigation words. Even today the echoes remain. Some trade routes carried knowledge that reshaped how humans understood the world. Papermaking moved west from China. Algebra traveled through the Islamic world into Europe. Navigation techniques crossed oceans. These transfers rarely felt revolutionary at the time. They were incremental, one technique at a time, one idea shared by firelight. There are also darker theories. That some knowledge was intentionally restricted. That certain routes were controlled to limit who could access advanced techniques. That information itself became a form of power. In some ancient societies, revealing trade secrets was punishable by death. Navigation knowledge, metalworking processes, medical remedies, knowledge traveled, but not freely. Trade routes also reshaped how people understood distance. The world became mentally smaller. Places that once felt mythical became reachable. This shift altered imagination. If distant lands exist, what else might be possible? Modern curiosity has ancient roots. As your breathing slows further, notice how this quiet web still holds the world together. Goods arrive without thought. Ideas cross borders instantly. Cultures blend continuously. But beneath all this speed is an ancient pattern. Connection built slowly, maintained carefully, and remembered imperfectly. As ancient trade networks grew denser, they began to do something no single ruler could ever fully control. They reshaped power itself. Cities that sat at crossroads flourished without conquering anyone. Ports became wealthy without armies. Communities gained influence simply by being reachable. Power shifted from land to movement. This was a quiet revolution. For the first time in human history, control did not come only from territory, but from access. Those who managed trade routes could influence entire regions without ruling them. They decided who met whom, who exchanged what, and when. This form of power was subtle, flexible, and resilient, and it terrified empires. Many ancient states tried to dominate trade rather than destroy it. They built checkpoints, collected tolls, issued protections, but trade routes had a habit of slipping around control. If one road became dangerous, another emerged. If one port demanded too much, ships sailed elsewhere. Trade favored adaptability over force. This is why some of the most powerful ancient cities were not capitals, but intermediaries, places that connected worlds. Over time, some routes vanished. Not suddenly, quietly. A river shifted, a climate cooled, a forest expanded, a political border hardened. Trade followed the easiest path. When conditions changed, routes faded into memory. Archaeologists still find traces, abandoned way stations, worn stones, foreign artifacts buried far from origin, ghosts of movement. Other routes survived by evolving. Land routes gave way to sea routes. Caravans gave way to ships. Wind knowledge became navigation science. The principles remained the same: connection, trust, timing. Modern shipping lanes still follow ancient paths, refined by technology but shaped by the same geography. There is a theory among historians that modern economic inequality traces back to ancient trade access. Regions that sat near early networks accumulated wealth, knowledge, and infrastructure. Those that didn't were left peripheral, not because of failure, but geography. Trade shaped destiny long before nations existed. Some conspiratorial theories argue that ancient trade elites deliberately shaped the world's development. That information was withheld. That routes were protected to maintain advantage. That global imbalance was engineered early. There is little direct evidence, but there is pattern. Access creates momentum, and momentum compounds over centuries. As the ancient world transitioned into the medieval era, many trade routes were rebranded as discoveries. Sea paths long known to local traders were found by newcomers. Names changed, credit shifted, history narrowed, but the routes themselves did not care. They continued. As you rest now, consider this gentle truth. The modern world feels fast, but it is built on slow movement, on footsteps across deserts, on sails catching predictable winds, on conversations held in many languages under shared stars. Global connection is not new. It is ancient, and it has always shaped humanity more quietly than conflict ever could. There is nothing left to chase tonight, no destination to reach, only paths, stretching backward through time, and forward into the unseen future. Let the routes fade softly. They don't need witnesses to exist. They never did. And as sleep arrives, remember this. Even in stillness, the world is connected.